You stayed silent. Not because you didn't care, but because you believed silence carried meaning. You believed it was mature, that it showed control, that it proved you were not desperate. You believed that by not reacting, by not chasing, by not demanding answers, something would be understood without words. But nothing was. And that silence didn't make you stronger. It quietly changed you. There is a kind of pain that doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't interrupt conversations. It doesn't force its way into the room. It waits. And silence is where it waits the longest. When they began to pull away, you noticed it immediately. The slower replies, the absence of curiosity, the emotional distance disguised as normalcy. You felt it, but you didn't comment on it. You told yourself this was restraint. You told yourself this was dignity. Stoicism teaches restraint. It teaches emotional discipline. It teaches not surrendering yourself to impulse. So you stayed composed. You didn't confront. You didn't accuse. You didn't ask where you stood. You believed that if something mattered, it wouldn't need to be questioned. And that belief felt noble. At first, because silence can feel like strength when it's chosen freely, but silence becomes something else when it's fueled by fear of loss. You weren't calm because you felt secure. You were calm because you didn't want to push them further away, and that distinction matters. You thought silence would communicate depth, that your absence would register as significance, that your restraint would be noticed. But most people don't interpret silence as meaning. They interpret it as permission. Permission to continue. Permission to move on. Permission to assume everything is fine, not because you were unimportant, but because you didn't disrupt their comfort. You didn't make them stop and reflect. You didn't create friction. You didn't force awareness, so they adjusted easily. And you stayed still. Staying still feels safe at first. It feels controlled. It feels dignified, but slowly it becomes heavy. Because silence doesn't pause time. It only delays truth. Unexpressed pain doesn't disappear. It doesn't evaporate. It reorganizes itself inside you. It becomes tension in your chest. A constant alertness. A quiet fatigue that never fully lifts. You didn't break down. You didn't beg. You didn't lose composure. You simply became quieter. You stopped sharing details. Stopped offering vulnerability. Stopped assuming people would stay. Not because you didn't want connection, but because you learned how fragile it felt. At some point, silence stops being a decision. It becomes habit, and habits shape identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who handles things alone. Someone who doesn't ask. Someone who doesn't need reassurance. You tell yourself this is strength, but there's a difference between strength and withdrawal. Stoicism was never about emotional disappearance. It was about emotional sovereignty, owning your internal world without surrendering it to chaos. But sovereignty doesn't mean isolation. It means presence. When silence costs you your presence, it stops being wisdom. You may have noticed something subtle. You still feel deeply, but you don't show it. You still care, but you don't express it. You still hope, but you don't allow yourself to expect. And that internal contradiction creates exhaustion, because suppressing expression requires constant effort. You're always monitoring yourself, always containing reactions, always measuring how much of you is allowed to exist. And over time, even your own emotions stop knocking as loudly. Not because they're gone, but because they learn they won't be answered. This is how numbness forms. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. You don't feel empty. You feel distant from yourself. And distance feels safer than pain. But safety without aliveness is a slow kind of loss. The Stoics understood something most people miss. Pain is not the enemy. Loss of agency is. You didn't lose agency when they left. You lost it when you stopped allowing yourself to respond internally. You froze emotionally to avoid destabilizing what little connection remained. And when that connection disappeared anyway, you were left with the freeze. Silence didn't prevent abandonment. It only ensured you endured it alone. That realization is uncomfortable, because it challenges the idea that composure always equals wisdom. Sometimes composure is fear, wearing discipline as a disguise. True Stoic strength is not silence at all costs. It's proportion. Knowing when to withhold and when to acknowledge. Knowing when restraint is power and when it becomes self-erasure. You didn't need to argue. You didn't need to beg, but you did need to remain internally honest. Silence is only virtuous when it doesn't require you to disappear. If staying quiet makes you smaller, if it dulls your inner voice, if it teaches you that your feelings are a liability, then silence is no longer serving you. It's training you to retreat. And retreat, repeated enough times, becomes identity. You don't announce your needs. You don't share your weight. You don't assume anyone will carry it with you. You become reliable, composed, unreadable, and deeply tired. You may notice now that you crave depth, but avoid exposure. That you want connection, but fear what it costs. That you long to be understood without having to speak, but understanding rarely arrives uninvited. Not because people are cruel, but because most are distracted. Silence doesn't protect you from loss. It only hides your grief from others. And hidden grief doesn't heal faster. It just isolates quietly. The Stoics never demanded silence as punishment. They valued clarity, clarity with oneself, clarity about what is felt, clarity about what is endured. You don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't need to express yourself impulsively, but you do owe yourself presence. Presence doesn't mean reaction. It means acknowledgement. It means allowing pain to be named internally, without judgment. It means refusing to abandon yourself just because someone else did. You stayed silent, and it changed how you relate to loss. It taught you to shrink, to wait, to endure quietly. But endurance without self-connection is not strength. It's survival. And survival, when prolonged, exhausts the soul. They didn't notice your silence, but you felt every moment of it. The waiting, the hoping, the gradual realization that dignity alone doesn't protect the heart. Now, the question isn't whether they should have stayed. That question keeps you tied to the past. The real question is quieter. Are you allowed to take up space again, without fear? Are you allowed to feel fully, without restraint becoming self-denial? Are you allowed to remain present, even when connection is uncertain? Stoicism doesn't ask you to disappear gracefully. It asks you to remain grounded, grounded in reality, grounded in self-respect, grounded in truth. And the truth is simple. You stayed silent because you were trying to preserve something. But now what needs preserving is you, not loudly, not dramatically, not in protest, just honestly. Stay, not to be noticed, not to be chosen, but to remain intact.